Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's session. Before we start, I just wanted to go through some quick housekeeping while everybody's settling in. Please keep your audio off. I think we're on webinar function, so it should probably do that for you anyway. We do have closed captions, so if you need to use those, please, you can make those work at the bottom of the screen. And if you have any questions or comments as we go through today's session, please drop them into the chat and we will try and come to those as we go through the session and have a little bit of time at the end if we need to as well. So it goes to me to introduce today's session. We're focusing on the significance of sporting heritage collections. And our event today is supported by National Lottery Heritage Fund, the amazing players of the National Lottery and the Welsh Government. And today's session, we're going to be looking and thinking about why and how we should understand and advocate for the significance of sporting heritage and sporting heritage collections. So it's going to be a panel discussion. We're going to have a lot of discussions, a lot of talking, a lot of sharing ideas. So please do feel free that you can put that any comments and questions into the chat, and they'll be really, really helpful and useful as we go through. And do feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat as well, so that we can get an idea about who's here and what you're hoping to gain from the session today. So first of all, some introductions. So I'm Dr Justine Reilly. I'm the Director of Sporting Heritage. I've worked in the museum sector for the last 25 years. Significance has been crucial to my journey in museums over that time. And over the last 6 months, I've been delivering a programme that's looked specifically at significance in sporting heritage in Welsh museums. So lots of kind of understanding about where the collections fit and how we advocate for them. And I'm joined today by two expert panelists who have come to share their knowledge and experience as well. So I'm going to briefly introduce them and then let them just quickly tell you about their role and where significance fits with them. So Laurie Ray, Head of Museum and Heritage at the R&A World Golf Museum. Laurie.
Hi there, Laurie, Head of Museum, as Justine says, at the R&A World Golf Museum here in St Andrews. My experience in collection significance goes back to 2011 when I led the museum's successful application to Scotland's recognition scheme. So that's the scheme owned by the Scottish Government, but managed for them by Museums Galleries Scotland, and it looks to recognise collections throughout Scotland that are integral to the social, cultural, political, etc. To Scottish life, essentially. As I say, we received this in 2011, and it's really proved a fantastic experience at the time going through the significance process and laterally as well. So looking forward to discussing that today.
Thanks so much, Laurie. Yeah, loads of experience there over quite a long time frame and understanding where that fits as well within all the wider political and cultural shifts and changes that happen as well, I imagine. So thank you. And then we're also joined by Siobhán Doyle from who's the Curator of National Museum of Ireland. Siobhán, I'm going to hand over to you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm based here in Dublin. As Justine said, I'm a curator in the National Museum of Ireland. I am also an author and a researcher. My first book was a history of the GAA in 100 objects, so the Gaelic Athletic Association, where I travelled all across the country to the 32 counties of Ireland, collecting stories through objects, trophies, documents, medals, equipment. It was 100 objects. I whittled it down from about 250 stories that I collected. So hopefully I'll be able to give some insight into how I whittled that down and significance. And I suppose in my role in the National Museum, we have to be very careful in the things that we collect due to space restrictions, which is a challenge for all of us in the museum sector, and other things like provenance and resources and finance and that kind of thing. So we've plenty to work from today.
Oh, amazing. Thank you so much, Siobhán. Yeah, there's loads of different experiences that you've got as well that are slightly different sometimes to the museum sector and the heritage sector and where that all fits together. So yeah, I'm fascinated to learn more about your work and hear from both of you about where that fits with what we're doing as an organisation that's trying to shout about the significance of these collections as well and understand that and help the sector to understand their own. So thank you. I'm going to start with, we have some questions here, so we're going to start going through those, but we will also take from the chat as well. First question that I have is quite huge when you actually think about it, but I'm going to ask you guys it anyway. So why is it, and why do you think it is important to be able to articulate the significance of sporting heritage, whether that be your own collections that you're working with or in general? And it is a huge question, and we can have as much time or as little time as you want on this. So I don't know who wants to go first on that.
Are you happy to take the lead, Siobhán?
Yeah, I'll go. I suppose first of all, significance can be kind of an overwhelming term, and it's kind of loaded as well. I think significance, especially in sporting heritage terms, there's things can have significance in different locations and different localities. So, for example, in my role, I work with the National Collection. But in my role as an author of books that are very much centered around communities and grassroots, things that were the things that I included, say, in the book wouldn't necessarily be approved as an acquisition to the National Collection. Through my work, I would have got a lot of offers of personal items, personal possessions that people would have offered to the museum, to the National Museum. But in many instances, I sent people or veered them towards their local museum because I knew that those objects would be of greater significance, and they would be, I'd argue, more appreciated closer to the localities that they were based around. So, for example, I had an offer of some medals from Galway that were won in like a local championship in the west of Ireland, beautiful medals and all that kind of thing. But I knew deep down that they would never really go on display in the National Museum. So I, it's all about maintaining relationships as well. We get a lot of goodwill from people. Going to you and offering their stories, and in some cases their objects. But we have a duty to those people as well to make sure that the objects are going to the right place. So that's come up for me a couple of times, and I think that's really important, is all like around the ethics as well.
I mean, so many things that you spoke about there, it makes me go back to that kind of question of what is significance? What does significance mean? And who is it significant to? And through the project we were looking at in Wales, that was fundamental to that understanding of what is significance. And we were talking just before the session started about, that subjectivity of significance. Often, particularly in the museum sector, it can feel very kind of formalized in terms of how we discuss significance. It's got to be an absolute fact, but actually significance isn't, you can't measure it in terms of those kind of like facts. It is more what, a kind of consensus of opinion, I think, about, well, who says it's significant? Who is it significant to? And I think you're right. It's like some collections will be massively important and significant to very localized audiences, and not so much in terms of that national picture. And that's absolutely fine. And it's understanding that it's fine as well, isn't it? And knowing where it should go. And I think having that confidence to go, it's all right to take part in a significance project and to think about, why are our collections, or what we're looking at, why is it significant? Who are we talking to find that out? And actually it might change, and that's all right.
Yeah, and I think what's really important with that as well is that there's often a lot of emotions involved with people that get in touch, and they are very tied to these objects and want to see them go somewhere else, or perhaps have a better platform. And I think it's also important to kind of be aware of those emotions and let people down gently, and be kind about it. Thanks but no thanks, but in a nicer way than that.
Totally get it. And Laurie, is that something that you experienced as well, in terms of, it must have been a massive undertaking when you were first looking at this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, our experience is slightly different from that of Siobhán, in the sense that we were having to assess and really, go through with a fine-tooth comb a pre-existing collection. Our rationale was to ensure that the entire collection of the museum was recognised as being nationally significant. Now, the recognition scheme in Scotland it can either be an entire collection of the museum or an element of that. So some of the universities museums, for example, might have their science collection. We felt that it was justified in the sense that, the entire collection merited that significant status. But to do so, we really, really had to analyse and take a hard look at what we held. The museum at that time was very much focused, I think it's fair to say, on, elite golf, you could say, and that would be, say, elite amateur, professional golf, and what you could call the big historic golf clubs, the Royal and Ancient, Musselburgh, Dublin, Blackheath, Manchester, these sort of places, are the upper echelons of the game. And our collection reflected that, and the displays reflected that. It's a premier collection for golf material worldwide. But the significance review, as part of recognition, really opened up all sorts of other avenues that we'd never previously explored whatsoever. And it really brought out a lot more of this social aspect, the cultural influence that golf has had on Scottish and dare say British and wider culture as well. And so when the museum closed during COVID to allow us to, and we took the opportunity to wholesale reinterpret, redisplay the museum, we took a completely different focus from the one we took previously. It used to be a very strictly chronological route, very thematic. Now we've taken the approach that's much more open plan, and we're looking at the human stories behind every item. It's not, we've moved away from this kind of overarching approach, and it's really to try and tell the personal aspects of each individual item. And we couldn't have done that at all without the significance review. And I think the good thing as well, as part of that, we've moved away from an approach whereby you're relying solely on experts in the field, other golf historians, other academics, curators, and we're engaging a lot more with associated communities. And I know this is an element of all our work across the board in the museum sector nowadays. And I think that is essential to defining significance in collections today and being representative.
I mean, that's amazing, isn't it? To see that shift in terms of doing the programme, of looking at, so what are we talking about significance? What does that mean to us as a museum? And then that totally changing how you're displaying. And I mean, stories, I always think stories are the focus point of what we do. That's why people are interested. That's why our collections are relevant. And if that's moved the way that you share your collections with your communities, I mean, that can only make it more of a relevant museum, whether you're interested in golf or not. And that's ultimately what, particularly in sport and heritage, what we're always looking for, isn't it? Is that the collections are important in and of themselves. They tell that story of sport and the journey of sport, but they tell such a broader story as well in terms of economic, political, social development, all of those kind of areas. And when you're starting to look at collections through stories rather than chronological or other kind of traditional routes, it really brings that out. I think it really shows that significance of, you can't just say it's just about sport. It's about why sport is so important to our whole society. And that's where, for me, that kind of significance is hugely crucial and important in terms of us understanding that as people working in the sector. And I was just having a look at some of the comments, and someone who was saying about, that they're interested about, where does this all fit in terms of like a national sort of register about where collections are. And we have a database that is slowly growing and doing that. And we talk quite a lot and advocate quite a lot about these collections. But this piece of work and what we're doing at the moment as Sport and Heritage around significance, I think, is crucial to that, changing the way people think about sport and collections. So I think sometimes there has been less of an understanding about why they're important and where they fit. You don't go into local authority museums generally and see a sporting collection. Why are they not there? They are so important and fundamental to our communities that should happen. And this kind of work is helping to be able to demonstrate that I think.
I think sometimes, just to pick up on that, Justine, I think sometimes it can be our detriment to pigeonhole collections as sport. As you said, they cross over so many different strands: tourism, social history, politics, and sometimes if we put the label of sport on them, it can kind of diminish their significance in some people's from some people's perspectives. And I think it's up to us to demonstrate how they do transcend different parts of society beyond sport.
I think the best sort of feedback we ever get from our visitors is someone who comes in and openly says at the end, you know, I had no interest in golf whatsoever, but I've learned so much today. And you know, I think you're entirely right, Siobhán. You know, it's sporting. Is as a label that I think can be detrimental sometimes, you know, even within the museum sector, when I go to, you know, conferences, other meetings, and I say I work at the golf museum, and to be honest, people say golf, why on earth would you do that? That's fair enough, and you may not be interested in golf, and you're maybe only people's understanding of golf is things like the Masters, as we were just discussing, you know, lush greens, manicured fairways, completely fake, if we're honest about it. That's not what golf is. You know, it started on the east coast of Scotland in the 15th century. It spread through the British Empire. The Industrial Revolution was hugely impactful in terms of how it spread throughout the UK and the democratization of the game and things like that. So you're entirely right, Justine, as well. It's the social and cultural aspect of golf that really interests me and what we're trying to share with our visitors nowadays. Golf has never existed on its own. It's always been led and has led in turn in some cases, you know, political, cultural, and social life within the country and beyond.
I mean, I think that's so true, and that kind of we've definitely felt that as the sector-wide organisation for sport, that sometimes there hasn't been that recognition of why these collections should be speaking on a par with, I don't know, natural history collections, for example, or, you know, or archaeological collections. And so there's been a lot of having to advocate about why they are important. So I guess we've been consistently doing that significance work, but not in a structured way. And we're shifting that now to start to be able to do it, because if we can support the sector to understand and demonstrate the significance of their collections, that gives us that power to then keep arguing that at those kind of funding policy levels, which then in turn help to support more investment coming back into the sector in the longer term. But you do frequently, even now, and things have changed quite a lot since we set up, but even now you still meet people who say that kind of, well, sport, why is that important? And there's that high-low culture, a bit of snobbery about where sport fits. People who weren't interested in sport when they were younger aren't interested in it. Lots of different things that are going on. And I think the more we can, like you were saying, Siobhán, as well, you know, that the more we can articulate that this is, yes, it's sport, but it's important because of all of these different reasons, I think that the more people will be interested and recognise that they need to take it seriously and think about where does that fit. So it was a big question, but it was great. So I'm just having a look at some of the chat to see if there's anything in here. So someone's saying, you know, that there's that kind of golden rule of like one man's trash is another man's treasure. And that kind of, you know, different people are always kind of going to see things in different lights, and that subjective thing that we were talking about. And then I'm just going to have a look if there's another question at the moment. There's some comments. I will look at those while we're discussing the next bit, because I wanted to talk about this. So we've talked about significance and what is it and why is it important, but how do we do that? How do, you know, if you were giving advice, I guess, from your experience and some of the things that you've been doing about how you look at your work and go, how do we measure the significance? What would you say to people? Where would you start?
I'll go. I'll take this one first off. I think at the very heart of it, you need to know what you have. Without an understanding of what's in your collection, and it's more than just like item name, you know, dates, things that you really need to delve into. You need to understand what you've got, because you can't pull out the significance from these basic details alone. An object isn't significant in its own right. It needs to be contextualized by its association with other items in your collection, by supporting documentation, other materials, things like that. So, you know, good collections management practices, you know, good cataloging records, you know, are at the very heart of it. Location control, it's all things, you know, most of us will be accredited museums, will have these sort of standards in place. But that is really the bedrock of being able to explore the significance of your collections, because we absolutely found that it was only going through the storerooms, you know, item by item, that you're actually identifying where the significance lies in pieces. You know, I'm sure we're not alone in that. Many of our object records on our catalogue would say golf club and nothing else. Now we've got about, 5,000 of those. How do we get the significance out from that? And it was only by actually appraising the maker, the date, who used it, all these sort of details that comes through. And as I was saying at the start, I was really discovering the previously underappreciated items that might just be metal. All of a sudden you're delving into the social history of a particular location, things like that. You need to know what you've got. That's the starting point, I would say.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
it.
Siobhán.
That's a great shout. That's what I would have had number one as well. See what you have and what's elsewhere. Just to see whether something is a one-off, whether it's legitimate as well is important as well. I would say certainly in my work with the museum, when we're making acquisitions, that it's a collective decision, that it's not just down to one curator. We all have bias, we all have the things that we like, the things that we don't like. We sit down as a division and we have our proposals of acquisitions and we tease them out. Not just stuff that we want, that we went looking for, but things that people have approached us with, because something that I might not deem as significant, someone else from the team might pop up with, actually that's pretty good. So I think just having those discussions and to make sure that it's not just, certainly I'm coming from an institution that is publicly funded, it's taxpayers' money. So I don't think any decision for an acquisition should be down to any one individual. So I think just having those discussions with your colleagues or other people. I'd always reach out, if I wasn't sure, people in other museums or other professionals or enthusiasts. There's a real usually there's a real good community of knowledge when it comes to sport, and it's really important to maintain those relationships as well. So definitely make the decision whether something is significant or not, make sure that it's a collective one.
Oh, brilliant points there. And I definitely echo that in the most recent, the Welsh programme that we worked on. We looked at different kind of collections. So we looked at collections where it was a very broad museum sporting collection, but no sports specialists working with it. And then we looked at collections that was a collection that was in a museum, a local authority museum, and then a club collection, a sports specific museum. And the museums that had the specialists working with them about those specific sports had so much knowledge and understanding about those collections. So even when it said things like golf club, they were able to look at it and understand those collections so much more carefully than when it was that very broad collection. And I think we learned quite a lot in terms of how to support the different types of collections. And we obviously don't just support museums. So we're looking at how do people who have collections that aren't within a museum environment also look at their significance. So we were constantly trying to think about how can that work and how can it translate. And it's quite straightforward in terms of where there's that knowledge and understanding about the collections. It was far more difficult in terms of the very broad local authority collections that might have 20 or 30 different sports that could potentially have national, international significance, but they might not know enough about those collections and have enough knowledge to bring in, and time, because capacity, it takes so much time to undertake a significance project and understand. So that was quite a lot of learning and interesting for us. And the peer reviews, so we did a lot of going out and asking other people that were external to the museums as well. Lots of community engagement, lots of sports engagement, and absolutely what you're saying, that was fundamental to understanding where do these collections fit. And sometimes, although the panel who'd been undertaking the review was making decisions about significance, most of the time they stayed the same, but there were sometimes changes that were coming in. Actually, you've missed that this is internationally significant and this is the reason why. So that kind of wider and broader consultation with all manner of different people who might be able to tell you about your collection. Yeah. But I was so pleased that you said, Laurie, about that kind of collections review and understanding. Oh my goodness, yeah, we wouldn't even take people onto that program if they didn't know what they had in their collections.
Yeah, you have to take a very honest assessment of your strengths and weaknesses as well. In particular, as I said at the start, we were keen to ensure that the entire collection was recognised. Now we could have focused on the golf club collection or the trophy and medal collection, but we wanted to tell that wider societal cultural story. There are areas that we're probably lacking on in many respects, particularly around women in golf, around other communities in golf. And so it's allowed us since then to revise our collections development policy and other associate policies to, actively correct in these areas, is what Siobhán's talking about as well. You need to target acquisitions in many respects as well to ensure significance too. And also, you're quite right, and both of you spoke about this as well, as ensuring that you are peer reviewed to an extent as well. As part of the recognition scheme in Scotland, you actually have to secure letters of support essentially from other experts within the field. And so we secured, probably around 20 from academics, fellow curators, and from those who you'd almost consider our rivals in other sports museums around the world. But like you say, Siobhán, it's a community. They're not in opposition to us, and they were always happy to support the museum in achieving this status, because what boosts us boosts everyone within the sector in many respects as well. And quite aside from justifying our recognised status, it's a great boost as a museum. To receive this sort of commendation on the collection, that you care for the work you're doing. And so I'd say it's a worthwhile process, and just the well-being of your team to achieve something less, to go through the process. It's absolutely fantastic at the end of it.
There's a really good point made in the comments as well by Fiona about when you don't acquire an object that you're offered for whatever reason, that it's good to know where it goes as well, and that documentation is key. So tracing where that object goes, or even if it doesn't go, is really important as well. So staying in touch with the donor, hanging on to that email, touching base. And as Fiona mentioned as well, you never really know if you're going to need that object or that story in the future. So that's something that we do in the museum as well. All of our acquisitions are documented just in a spreadsheet. Each of the curators put their proposals into a spreadsheet, and we put the ones that are we keep the ones that are rejected on file as well, and the reason why we've decided not to. Sometimes it's for financial reasons, sometimes we have other things like it in the collection, or sometimes it's just not the right time to collect that. So to maintain that information on the no's, and importantly, just for researchers and curators coming in afterwards, that they know why it wasn't collected at the time. So, and I would have done the same when I was writing my book, that I had everything on a spreadsheet, and I still can trace the 250 stories that I collected, even though 100 only made the book, because there's always room for a volume 2. So I'll be glad at that spreadsheet when that happens.
I mean, brilliant point, because yeah, you don't know when you might need to use the subjects going forward, and you want to know what's happening to them, that broader story of where they are. And what you mentioned there, Laurie, about the review allowing you to understand where the gaps are as well, and it not just being about that kind of, well, we got this and this is it. It's like, okay, but what are we missing, and how could this be more significant, or where are the key areas we need to develop? Can give you that kind of broader plan of next steps. So, some amazing kind of points in there in terms of like getting things ready, thinking about how to do this, and that it's okay and manageable. And I guess having a process in place of what to do and when to do it. And out of the Welsh work that we've been doing, we will have a part of our toolkit. We'll talk about how to do that and the steps that you can go through that aren't hopefully too overwhelming, but that are relevant to anyone who has a sporting collection, not just in a museum. So it could be a sports club, governing body, historical collection of a school, anybody that's got that, who wants to think, right, how do I go about this? It should support them to be able to do it. Hopefully that will help the sector moving forward. And I noticed there's a question that's appeared in the chat. So, which is really fascinating. So does the context of the story that you're trying to tell affect what you see as significant in a collection?
Yeah, that one's, I think, kind of a case by case basis. Certainly when I was writing the GA 100 objects book, I didn't have a list of objects that I wanted. I had a list of places like museums and pubs and private collectors that I wanted to go to, and I was going to see what they had rather than having a list for them to see what, you know, how their stuff could fit me. So I think an open mind is key as well, because that's where you get some of the best stories, those unexpected ones. So I think does the context of the story you're trying to tell affect what you see as significant? Yeah. It honestly, I know this is a terrible answer, but it depends every time, and it depends on what the context of how you're showcasing that object is. So sometimes it might be pages of the book, sometimes it could be an object in a display case, other times it could be a social media post or, you know, a blog for a website. And you have different means of communicating that. So in exhibitions we're restricted to word count, whereas in blog posts you can just shoot the breeze. With objects that go on display, some things can only go on display for 6 months due to conservation. Some things can't go on display at all. So there's many other factors that, you know, have to be incorporated before you even get to being able to tell the story and how. That's
No, and I guess it's what you were saying as well, you know, that necessity of understanding what you don't take and what doesn't become part of your collection can also be part of that subjective. You know, what story am I trying to tell at the moment? It might be different to the one I'm trying to tell in 5 years' time, and now I need that object.
Yeah,
where
exactly.
is it?
I think you hit on the head there, Siobhán. You said an open mind is necessary, and I think that's entirely right. And you know, I think the question's entirely correct as well. You know, context is everything in many respects, but keeping an open mind is really key. You know, I'm gonna potentially open myself up for ridicule. I'm not even a golfer. I don't, I don't particularly like playing it, but I love everything about the game itself, its history, the culture behind it, how it's evolved, things like that. Now, I work for golf's governing body worldwide, and within, you know, among my peers, you know, that's frowned upon to say the very least. But I think it allows me to
We won't
take,
tell anyone.
yeah, I know it's within this group, you know, it allows me to take a much more sort of like you know, take a broader view of what's significant. To the R&A, who run the Open, you know, golf's oldest major, the Women's Open as well, likewise, you know, all these elite amateur and professional championships. Professional and championship golf is the key. So, you know, they love the medals, you know, the trophies, you know, the clubs used by the champions, you know, things like that. Whereas it'll be something completely random for me. You know, it always sticks in my head. When we did this significance review, I came across a medal, and it was from a Masonic lodge over on the west coast of Scotland. And, you know, it's a completely innocuous, tiny little medal. But for me, it really summed up the story we're trying to move away from, you know, the kind of top level golf. Because when golf, you know, really boomed across the UK, it was, you know, during the Industrial Revolution, you know, with increased, you know, holiday time, better transport links through the railway network and things like that. And all these societies sprung up within hospitals, within churches, banks, businesses, of clubs, golf clubs that didn't own a course. And so allowed people who weren't club members, you know, they could go to the coast, you know, St Andrews, North Berwick, you know, throughout the north and west coast of England and things like that to play the game. And this tiny little Masonic Lodge medal was really emblematic of that. And it was really when golf, you know, really grew in the public imagination and really cemented itself as not purely a Scottish game, because really even up until about the 1890s, it was pretty much a Scottish game. You know, it was really that 1890s to early 1900s period when it grew all across England, and then golf really cemented itself as not purely a national sport, very much an international one.
Just to pick up on something that Laurie said there as well about his lack of golfing, and I think there's absolutely no harm in that distance from your subject as well. For example, when we were going through the editing process of a history of the GA in 100 objects, we made sure that one of the proofreaders or one of the editors was not a GA aficionado, so that they could take a step back and go, oh, I've no idea what you're talking about, like what you mean. And the same when the book was developed into an exhibition in the National Museum, I made sure that those that were reading over the text weren't GA enthusiasts, because we wanted to be able to tell the story to a broad audience, that critical distance as well. So I think that that's really important. Like, I used to work in Croke Park in the GA Museum, and one of the most entertaining and longest serving tour guides there, rugby was his #1 sport, and what that allowed him to do was to be able to take a step back and explain the sports really well, particularly to those international groups. He was able to not have that local rivalries and local bias. He wasn't involved in any of that, so he was able to tell the story in a really in a way that those of us that were engaged in GA every weekend couldn't, because we couldn't understand, we couldn't understand how everybody doesn't know everything about it, kind of thing. But yeah, I think our work can't just be an uncritical celebration of the sports that we love. That that distance is an important part of our work as well.
I think that's so important. You were dropping out a little bit, Siobhán, and you went out of sync, and I'm hoping that you've dropped out again there, and you're going to come back into sync again. But it's just it's just to warn people. Don't worry about it. It's fine. Me and Laurie clearly went, oh no, don't go. Yeah, somebody asked earlier about funding, and where does funding fit in terms of this? And I think that kind of ability to say that this isn't just about a group of people who are really, really fascinated and interested in this sport. The ability to be able to say this is why it's important on this wider, broader, all the different things we've been talking about really is the only way that the funding will come in. It's so crucial to be able to, particularly from the public funding and from places like lottery, those kind of areas, you need to be able to demonstrate why this is important. And so going back to that question that was earlier on about, where does that happen? I think it is crucial to be able to say these collections fit within that broader framework, and to have people that are coming at it who aren't part of that to give you that peer review or that kind of wider, why are you talking about this and why is that bit important? I think it's crucial to be able to articulate that to funders and say this is why it's important. It isn't just us saying it, it's the people that we want to come and see it and understand about it saying it, and this is the way we would share it. So yeah, brilliant. I'm just going to check and see if there's any other questions in there. There's some comments coming through, and as we go in a while, I'll try and pull some of those comments in. But there was another question that you briefly, I think you've both briefly touched on this as we've gone through, but there was something that you specifically said, Laurie, about well-being and about the fact that going through a process is really beneficial in terms of your organisation. And I think, Siobhán, you were talking about it as well in terms of that, making sure there's not just you, there's other people that are taking part in that. But yeah, so I wanted to ask about the benefits of being able to understand your collections and the significance of them, and then being able to advocate that. We've touched on it a little bit, but yeah, it would be great to hear more from why you think that has been beneficial to you as individuals and organisations.
I think you're not going to get a deep understanding of a collection by sitting on your laptop at home on your own. I think it's important to get out there, visit museums, talk to the people that are involved in these collections. Because I think, particularly when I was doing the research for the book, I where possible, I went to see the objects. We have great technology, we've digitization collections that are available all over the world, but where possible, I did go to visit the museums and the private collections to see the objects, so that you can get a sense of them, a sense of the place that they're in, the environments that they're in. But then you notice other things like the size of them is different than what you thought, or the material or the condition. So where possible, I would say get out there and talk to people and engage with these collections in person. I think, like, I'm really jealous of Sporting Heritage. I wish we had something like this in Ireland. And it's one of the only newsletters that when it comes into my email inbox that I actually read it properly. So that's always good. But I'm really envious. I'm really envious of what you've built and what you're developing. And not only from, you know, for events like this, but also for collegiality and building up this community, because with a lot of smaller museums, you can be so isolated. And I think things like conferences and these events, just talking to people and just realizing that, you know, you face the same challenges, or you're working on a similar type of thing. I think it's really good to have those opportunities to speak to people, because yeah, research and writing can be really isolating. So when you get the chance, absolutely do go for it.
Thanks, Siobhán. Definitely taking that quote. Somebody's asked in the you've obviously asked mentioned about the newsletter, so somebody's asked about how they can subscribe to the newsletter, and I think Fran will possibly in a moment drop that in for you to be able to do that if you're not already. And you can also follow on Eventbrite if you're not already, and it'll tell you if there's any events coming up. But yeah, I mean, that ability to share, and I'm constantly learning about different collections and about the way that different collections interact with each other. And we do a lot of advice sessions now and reviewing sessions where we're talking with people in the sector, and I kind of fight to do that myself, so that, you know, to be able to strategically plan what the organization is doing, I've got to be able to talk to the people that are doing the work on the ground, and to hear what the needs are and what the shifts are and what they need in terms of advocating for significance and saying these collections are important. And yeah, I'm constantly in awe of hearing what people are doing and how they're using these collections and understanding them, and how it's shifting and changing as well. It's brilliant. And so there is an international project we're just about to start working on, so I'll share that a bit more widely at some point soon. I can't tell you anything about it yet, but at some point soon, and that might help broaden it out a bit. Laurie,
in terms of benefits and things, I think, you know, you touched on it just at the start of the question, Justine. I think, you know, going through a process like this builds confidence, you know, within yourself, you know, your expertise, your collections, and I think it bestows a sense of gravitas to an extent as well. And I think that doesn't matter whether you go through a significance review on your own or whether you're part of a formal scheme like recognition in Scotland or designation in England. It doesn't really matter. It raises your profile. And it's opened up opportunities to us that I don't think we would necessarily have access to previously, particularly around partnership working. Now, that's been both within, you know, the recognised collections group within Scotland, but also working with national museums within Scotland as well. National museums aren't part of the recognition scheme; it's non-nationals, but it's opened up the opportunities for joint exhibitions, loans with the National Galleries of Scotland, V&A Dundee. We've worked on quite a lot of international ones as well, like Palace of Versailles, Warsaw, you know, the Netherlands, things like that. So you've got all these opportunities by raising your profile, raising your collection's knowledge and understanding of what you've got. The marketing that comes with it as well is also important as well. It can be a revenue generation. And I think as well, to be honest, yes, funding is a core part of that. I'm not saying that was the driver when we first went for recognised status, but certainly as far as our governance was concerned, that's been a real key motivator behind that. For a long time, as part of the recognition scheme in Scotland, there's ring-fenced funding available for the recognised collections alone. Now, that stopped a few years ago. Recognition was paused just before the pandemic, and it's just relaunching now. But in the internal discussions within the group, I think it's fair to say that the lack of that ring-fenced funding is a bit of a cause for concern for the recognised collections. It's not just about, you know, great exhibitions and acquisitions and subject knowledge and things like that. I think funding for all of us is absolutely essential, and any way that significance can help, raise your profile in order to tap into these resources, all the better for all of us.
Oh, definitely. I mean, the funding question always raises its head, doesn't it? But it's fundamental. If you haven't got capacity and you haven't got the means to be able to do this work and have the people to support you and do this work, it's really difficult. And that kind of being able to demonstrate why the collections are important, thinking about collections that aren't museums and heritage, but are within a sports club or a governing body. Often there's that argument that has to be made about, well, why are we thinking about heritage? I spend a lot of time talking to people at quite high levels often in sport and saying, but this is your heritage. It's like, yeah, I know it's heritage, but it's sports heritage. I can't impress enough on you about why this is important, and being able to pinpoint specific objects or specific stories or specific events that have happened within their sport, and then talk about those in terms of material culture or intangible heritage or whatever way we want to talk about it, but in a way that works for them, and say this is why it's important, why it's significant, can sometimes shift their mindset in thinking we shouldn't be skipping that, we should be keeping it. And it is sometimes that is what's happening. These collections are just being disposed of without that consideration of, why are we doing that? Do these tell stories that we need to be keeping? And the more people we can help to understand that and change that opinion, the more of these collections I think will be preserved for the future, where we can start thinking, where do they fit?
I think you hit the nail on the head there, Justine. I think trying to shift perceptions of sporting heritage at the top level, at the high level, is a real challenge. And I think Barry has asked about grants and funding, and that's something that I couldn't find a space for within my work. I knew that when I was writing the book that I was doing it separate to my role in the museum, and it would have to be self-funded, but I felt like I should get a bit of a hand. So I approached different organizations. The Arts Council didn't fund non-fiction at the time, the grant that I applied for. The Sports Council are only interested in sports people. So unless you're actually playing the sport rather than writing about it or advocating for its history or heritage, they're not really interested. And I think from at the high levels, they find it really hard to, certainly in Ireland, to take sporting heritage and sporting history seriously. So that's something that I and my colleagues need to get a bit more articulate at, and opening those doors, because if we don't advocate for it, who will? So
I totally echo that in terms of England. Wales, not so much. There's a definite recognition, I think, there of the value of what sporting heritage is telling to society and the importance of it. I definitely see a difference. In England, absolutely. We find it incredibly difficult when we're advocating to the arts and heritage sector. Some are brilliant, don't get me wrong, National Lottery Heritage Fund are amazing. There are other funders that are brilliant and policymakers, but on the whole, it's really difficult to advocate when it's sport, and likewise into sport. And it's a fundamental part of what we do, trying to tell the stories. And I know, is it Barry that's asked about that? Yeah, that advocating and constantly being able to tell that story of why it's specifically important to their strategic plan, I usually find is the only way. You can market really well through the heritage of your club, those kind of things, and being able to say why that's important, and understanding the different kind of people that have been involved in your community and your club, and being, you can't see it if you can't be it if you can't see it. So it's that kind of like trying to help people to understand why the heritage is important. You never see anybody win anything without saying, oh, these people were important, or this was important in the past. So you have all the time. And in terms of the journalist, constantly it goes back to looking at the heritage of sport, but then for some reason we don't then value it in terms of the kind of work that we're doing in the same way. And Laurie, I don't know how it is in Scotland. Obviously we have a lot of work happening in Scotland, and so I get my sense from us as an organisation, but in terms of a museum working there, how does that feel?
Yeah, I think you're right, and I can share some of those frustrations in many respects. I think we've got the benefit in that, golf is recognised as, Scotland's national game. Football notwithstanding, but it's recognised worldwide as the home of golf. So in terms of, promotional marketing around, Visit Scotland, even when Scottish government is doing, initiatives around driving Scotland to the world, golf often tends to play a role within that. But I agree. There's often a sense of lip service around it, and I have to say, even within the RNA itself, as I mentioned, we run the Open, golf's oldest major, from 1860. The heritage and traditions of the Open is everything about what makes it as a championship significant. No one else can make those claims that we are able to make through those stories and traditions and things like that. And we support that, through information, content, for social media drives, books, publications, films, things like that. But actually trying to get the significance of the museum and its collections across as a value is sometimes tricky. We're incredibly well supported by the RNA. I'm not going to deny that whatsoever. And we're incredibly fortunate in that. But I think it's almost making that leap from just paying lip service to heritage and traditions and history and things like that into actually something a bit tangible is difficult for governing bodies, for politicians, these sort of organizations that you're really trying to tap into. Yeah, journalists even, as I know that came up there as well. Often we engage with the media, but again, it's it's not necessarily about the museum. It's not about the collections. It's
Yeah, it's
great
when
to
it
be
fits with
involved,
their.
but yeah.
Yeah, I totally get that. It's where it fits in terms of journalists. It's if they've got a story and something, it's where it fits with them rather than, oh, why, what is this and why is it important to us? And my final question was going to be around the challenges and the barriers that can help recognise the significance of collections, which we started to touch on a little bit there. And I don't know if there's anything else you want to add in terms of the things that you found difficult or that you can see are difficult, that cause issues and barriers around anything you've done around significance.
I think, from my point of view, a lot of it we've touched on already, it is resources, and that's both time and personnel to conduct, a significance review. It is time consuming. It's a lot of work. You need to look in, therefore, in terms of storage conditions as well. How easily can you actually access your collections if you're going to go through them all individually and really try and appraise them, as I think, as I've mentioned, is necessary for a significance review. Again, the collections management systems, what's your online catalog or not online digital catalog like? Does it have all the information you need to be able to properly assess these things? So a lot of it's core museum work. So, it's in place for many organizations. If you're not a museum, you probably have some sense of your cataloging anyway as well. But it's these sort of areas you almost have to look at first before really embarking on significance review, because there's every chance you'll miss something otherwise.
Yeah, for sure. I'd echo that as well. The resources and for us space to actually hold these collections and care for them. And that's, one of the key considerations for us, as well as the condition of things as well. And just to pick up on something that David is asking in the chat, is there advice for sports club and collections? I would say label everything. That would be an absolute basic, and just anything that you take into your care on behalf of a club or whatever it is, make sure that you can care for it on a long-term basis. Because what really bugs me is every so often, every couple of years, in the Irish media, politicians will try to fast forward a new museum opening up when our existing museums are severely underfunded. So I think just having long-term consideration for collections is really paramount for us. So just for anyone else that's caring for collections, just to keep that in mind as well.
I think, we just last month hosted the first Golf Heritage Conference here in St Andrews. We had delegates from around 80 golf clubs from throughout the UK and Ireland and beyond as well. And it was really aimed at supporting clubs in, what do they do with their heritage? What do they do with their archives, photo albums, trophies, medals, clubs, all this sort of material. And I really echo what you said, Siobhán, there. It's, the information's out there. Collections Trust is fantastic for this sort of information. You can follow the Spectrum standard, even if you're not a museum or anything like that. It's all clearly laid out. There's great case studies. Consult that. That shows you how to put together an inventory, how to put together a cataloguing system, all this sort of information. Tap into those resources or contact people such as myself, Siobhán, all the other sporting museums in your locality, or sporting or not. Everyone wants to be able to help. The preservation of heritage, helps us all. If a club knows what they've got and we can make use of it for a temporary exhibition or a loan, all the better. It benefits everyone.
Oh, I mean, absolutely. And it's exactly what Sport and Heritage exists for, to try and help everybody who's got a collection or who's got an interest in Sport and Heritage to understand where else they can get support. We're a network organisation. Often people will ask if we can take their collections, but that's not our job. Our job is to help build those partnerships of where collections might fit or information might fit. And so kind of to answer that, Fran's put in the chat that we have a toolkit which talks of all sporting collections and was built for clubs and governing bodies, but is relevant to anyone that's got a sporting collection. And that goes through, a lot of the links go off to Collections Trust. It's all built on Spectrum and CALM. So they're kind of like the industry standards for how you support your collections database and how you look at your collections. So everything is, even though it's aiming it for people who are outside of the heritage sector, it's all built to try and support that understanding of collections. So please do use that link. Fran also is running a webinar. I don't know if you've put it in there, Fran, which is looking at that kind of stage before the collections review. What do you do to understand what collections you have before you're even thinking about significance? So that's definitely something else that I'd advise going and having a look at if that's not something that you've done already. And as an organisation, we've always got network events. You can always come to us. We've started to run advice surgeries now, so where you can come and ask for advice and support, and we can network and signpost people on as well for any other support they've got. The sector is amazingly generous with its time, like you guys today, really generous with sharing information and support, and anything that we can do to help that happen, come and ask, and we'll do our best to make that happen. We've got 3 minutes left. I'm just going to check if this new message is oh no, it's some extra kind of study days and information that's coming up for anybody. I just wanted to let both of my panelists maybe have one final kind of like say about, what significance is meant to you, and what would you say to anybody thinking about undertaking a significance review? Got about a minute each.
I love the experience of going through the recognition process. It was incredibly hard work. It was incredibly stressful. I'll admit that the night before we had to submit it, because we had to submit a hard copy in person back in 2011. I actually slept in the museum on one of the benches in the galleries for an hour in a sleeping bag before getting back to it. It was a dreadful experience, but afterwards, it was the most uplifting, incredible feeling. As I've mentioned, felt galvanized. We'd increased knowledge about what we held. We'd uncovered new stories, new themes that we'd have never previously considered displaying, both within the permanent galleries and the temporary exhibitions. It was absolutely invaluable. So it's an incredible amount of work, but you wouldn't regret it, even if it's nothing to do with funding or anything like that. Advocacy, partnerships, do it for yourselves as much as anything, and you'll find all sorts of benefits on the back of it.
Amazing. Siobhán?
Yeah, I'd be Jesus, well done to you, Laurie, for your dedication. I don't know if I'm that that dedicated to my work. I suppose I'm happy enough with everything that we have touched on across the webinar, but I suppose there's one point that I'd like to reiterate, and is that that's to maintain good ethics when it comes to collecting and researching and advocating. As I mentioned earlier, I would have people approach me with offers of donations and objects. Just make sure that that's really what they want to do, that they're willing to part with it, that kind of thing. That when you're conducting interviews, that you're doing so in a kind and gentle way. You move at the pace of trust. Don't be too pushy with interviewees and with donors. And it's just is maintaining good relationships will always be helpful when we're trying to advocate for sporting heritage and for our collections as well.
Oh, amazing. Thank you both so much for your time and knowledge today. I've learned so much from the work that you've been doing as well. It's been brilliant. Just to let the participants know that we will save the chat and share that. Obviously, the session's been recorded, so that will go up onto YouTube and that will come out for anyone to have a look at and share with anybody else. And yeah, it just remains for me to say thank you, Laurie and Siobhán. That's been brilliant speaking with you today, and hopefully see you both soon.
Thank you so much.
Everybody.
Thank you very much, and thanks everyone for your questions.